If you're not hiring for the reality and you're just hiring for the potential, it's like getting married to somebody, you know, like, oh, I love them, but I think she'd be a terrible wife. That's getting married for the potential, not for the reality. And let's face it, you're marrying this person at work. You're going to be spending 8 hours a day with them, working with them. You know, that's more than you probably spend awake with your significant other. You're getting married to this person. Is this the kind of person you want to get married to? Hire for the reality of who they are. What are they bringing to the table? What are their actual skill sets? Make sure their attitude is right. Make sure that their actual reality of who that person is as a human being is right. And you're going to have, you know, a match made in heaven. So how do you do that? All right, well, welcome back. By the way, if you haven't, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We appreciate it if you did. You know, today, last time I actually talked about, you know, understanding your time value. And if you haven't like got a firm grip on that, make sure you go back and watch that last video to understand your time value. Today, I want to talk about something that like I think is really, really impactful, and that is like making sure you're hiring at the right time, at the right pace. You know, so hire faster, but hire right, and then fire faster when you find out somebody's not in the right position. It's one of the things I've learned over, you know, a lifetime of being self-employed, but especially over the last, 11 years as I've been scaling my company to where it's at. Scaling a company up from a startup where you're the only man up to a $50 million company with 200 employees. It's a big challenge. And, I think we've done it at a fast pace compared to most, in 11 years to be able to achieve that. Seems like a pretty solid achievement. You know, and we're shooting for $70 million this year. I mean, that's going to be a big leap this year. We had a flat year last year, but we've got plans for it to be a bigger company this year. And what that means for me is I have got to get this right, and you should really be working to get it right as well. Your hiring and your firing need to be on point. And when I say hire faster, it doesn't mean that I'm just going to hire willy-nilly, right? I'm not just going to hire the next guy on the street because I think maybe he can do the job. What it means is you need to first have clarity about what you're trying to achieve with hiring, right? When you're early on, when you're hiring your first couple of people, you probably need to look for something different than if you're at 50 people or more, 100 people or whatever. Early on, what I would do when I was hiring somebody, for you guys who are just starting out, understand your time value, make sure that you are hiring to get you to be maximized in the thing that you provide the highest time value in, and then start defining what's taking your time that's not leaving you in your highest time value. And that will become your first few hires' job description. So if you're spending time, doing scheduling or doing books or doing recruiting, there's a million things that come in that are away from the core that you have the biggest strengths in. And you've got to look at it and say, hey, can I hire somebody to leave me in my strengths, and how are they going to be productive? So even if it's your first hire, you should start to define what the role is that you're trying to fill, and you should define it very, very clearly. So if I'm early on saying, hey, I'm spending 10 hours a week doing books, well, that's not really enough to justify. So maybe at first you want to outsource it, right? You have somebody that just does books part-time, and there's just a way that you can interface with them. And you don't actually have to hire yet. Get somebody to do it, an outsourced bookkeeping agency. But when you get to that point where you're like, yeah, I need some extra help. I need a receptionist. I need somebody to do books. I need somebody to do scheduling, and I'm going to cross-train them. Define what that is that they're going to be doing exactly. And then hire for specifically that. But I need you to add one other thing if you're early on in the game. If you've got less than 10 employees or something, the other thing that you need to add on, and this is really important, when you're doing that interview, you need to tell people, this is what I'm hiring you for. This is your primary expected role, and these are the things you're going to be doing for me, right, in order to maximize my time where I'm the most productive. But in addition to that, and this is a key point early on, I need you to understand that you need to be flexible. You need to be willing to do whatever I ask you to do. And this may sound demeaning, and I will literally say this, and I used to say this early in the interview. If it means I need the toilet cleaned because we haven't hired a cleaner to clean this office yet, then that's what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm not going to feel any shame about it, and I need you to understand I'm not trying to be demeaning, but there's just things that need to happen. Clean up around the office, clean the toilet, vacuum the floors, Your main job may be doing books, but if you're going to be here and you're going to be full-time and I don't have quite enough full-time work for you to just be doing that full-time, I need you to understand that you're just on my team and I need you to be flexible and I need you to grow with me. If you're not willing to do that, hey, this probably isn't going to be a good fit for you. And that's okay, because you'll find somebody that looks at it and says, hey, I can see this guy's like aggressive. He's growing. He's going to make something happen. And he understands his needs. And so have clarity about exactly what their normal day-to-day should be, but also find somebody who's got flexibility. Later on, if you've got, your team's growing, you got 20, 30, 40, 50 more people, those roles should be really well defined, down to the point of where they have KPIs. If you don't know what KPIs are, do your research. Key performance indicators. How are you going to measure their productivity? And really put that down on paper. What is your job description, and how am I going to measure your productivity? And then create systems to where you can measure them. And then hire for the role and be very specific about what those KPIs are, about what their expected output is, about what their expected work hours are, what their dress code is. Be specific. The more specific you can be and the better you can set the expectations up front, the better off you're going to be. But then don't be afraid to hire, and don't be afraid to give people, empower them to make decisions. So you hire somebody, you've done 10 interviews, maybe you've screened 40 resumes, 50 resumes, and narrowed that down to, your 5 best candidates, and you interview 5 people. And if you don't feel it, and if you're not like, hey, yeah, these 5 aren't the right ones, then keep the ad running and keep going, because the time you invest in finding the right people and hiring faster, but hiring right, is going to pay off big time in the end. A couple of days ago, I actually saw something about how Japanese companies, a guy I know was doing a factory tour with a company in Japan, and the owner of that company was who he was doing the tour with, and the owner said, if somebody's not showing up early, they're probably not the right fit for our company. And not only are they probably not, but they just let them go. Like if they're just showing up barely on time. And the point to that is that it's not that you have this crazy expectation of, are they just on time and did they do the job? But it's like the only thing that they're looking at is trading their time value. And they're not looking at it from, hey, I'm going to be invested in the culture of this company and the growth of this company. Because if they're invested, they're going to be ready to come to work. They're going to have some energy around what they do. And that talks about, when I talk about firing faster, it could also be that maybe you hired somebody and maybe they're a good person, but they're just in the wrong seat on the bus, right? You've got a bus, you're driving this bus and you're going a certain direction. And maybe you're not playing to their strengths. And maybe, if you're big enough, you can adapt and move them into a different role or give them different responsibilities, and that'll work. But having clarity about what you're hiring for and then hiring right and getting it done is super important. And if you're spending too much time doing menial stuff that you don't have a high time value in, then you haven't hired fast enough. So it takes some effort, but once you do it, it's going to free you up to scale your company. The other thing that has to come with that, though, is trust. If you don't know if you can trust that person, if your gut's telling you, I'm not sure I can trust this person to be diligent about what they do, to work hard at what they do, to take pride and ownership in their role in the company, then that's the wrong person. Don't hire them. If they're the kind of person who's going to take pride and ownership in what they do, then you need to give them the ability to have some independence away from you to make decisions. And early on, what I would do is I would tell people, all right, listen, you just started. I expect you to do the job. Make the best decision you can. Here's a decision-making matrix. If it's going to cost the company more than, $500, then ask me about permission of whether or not you should make that decision. But if it's going to cost less than $500, I need you to weigh in. What is the value of, our customer relationship in whatever situation you're dealing with, and is it attempting to save the company money, or is it being cheap and it's going to cut our legs out from under us because we made bad decisions on not spending enough? If it's under $500, just make the decision. Do what you think is right. And as my trust grows with them, that limit grows to the point now where I have people on my team that make $100,000 decisions. And, at 100,000, that's a pretty big number. But I trust people to actually make those kinds of decisions. We have regularly like decisions on what software packages we're going to use that cost us $100,000 a year or more that I had little or no input on. And over time, you'll build that trust with your team that stays with you. You'll learn who those key players are, who those A players are that you can really have a high level of trust. So fast decision-making, not desperation. Make sure you're not desperate to fill the role. Fill the role with the right person and get them in the right seat on the bus. Now, briefly on, the firing side of things. You get emotionally attached to people. You like them, but they're not doing the job well. That's a huge cost. You need to understand that you can be a friend to somebody, but you can also be their boss, and you have to make sure that you can maintain a clear relationship. I have many employees in my company who I would consider are friends, but they also understand that I'm their boss and I have expectations, and they should absolutely hit those expectations and work to exceed them. Their goals should be completely aligned with my goals. And if I feel like their goals are not completely aligned or they're not putting in the effort, even though I may be friends with them, I may have to have a sit down with them and have a hard conversation and say, hey, listen, I don't feel like our goals are aligned. This is something I learned from the Dave Ramsey company going to their seminars is you need to ask if they share your urgency about something and that they're underperforming. And that shared urgency about achieving goals that you're trying to hit needs to get right down to the point where you understand and they understand that if they don't share your urgency about what's important to you as you're trying to grow a company, that their job is at risk for sure. There can't be any questions about it, no matter how much you like the person. It sounds harsh. It's the reality, though. You're either going to be dragging an anchor or you're going to be adding a sail onto your ship. You got to pick which one it is. And when I talk about firing faster, if you don't understand the difference of whether or not they're an anchor or a sail, you need to get clarity on that. And if they're an anchor, you need to have an alignment conversation where they're going to share your urgency and become a sail, or you need to let them go. That's it. You can't be afraid to let people go. What I've found in personal experiences, there's been many times where, and I had to learn this the hard way, and I'm trying to help you accelerate this process. You can't be heartless. You got to be friends with your people, but you also got to be like, this is business and I'm here to do business. I'll hang out with you and have a beer if I want to later on, but during the workday, we are here to get something done. And I can't be always wondering if you're going to get your part done. I can't be wondering if you're owning your part completely and seeing it through to full completion to everybody's satisfaction. You've got to be helping push this whole thing forward. So don't get lost in the sunken cost fallacy where you're looking at a situation and saying, man, I've trained them and I don't want to have to retrain somebody else, but I can't get them bought in. So I guess I'll get by with it good enough and I'll just try to figure it out later. No, that's a sunken cost fallacy, which is if they're failing to do the job and you're having to make up the difference, it's adding stress to your life and you don't have belief that they're going to follow through. Just because you've sunk some cost in there doesn't mean you shouldn't take the time and effort to replace them. Because when you do replace them with somebody and you let go of that sunken cost fallacy, the fallacy of belief of like, it's going to cost me more to replace them, it's going to cost me more time than it's worth, that doesn't matter. Getting the right person in the right seat, pushing forward is way more important. So don't be afraid to let somebody go if they don't share your urgency, if they're not hitting their KPIs, if you're not getting it dialed in for what their performance expectations are, and they don't agree with you that that's super important, then replace them. That's it. Let them go. Let them know that, hey, I'm going to fill in the blanks on what I've had you doing for the moment if I need to, or cross-train somebody else if you have a big enough team to fill in the blanks, but let them go and find somebody else. The sunken cost is a cost that will continue to be an anchor if you just don't cut the rope and let that anchor go and replace them with a sail. So it's not cruel. Some people think that that's heartless. It's cruel. Oh, I'm just going to let them go. If you've done your due diligence, you've trained them properly, you've set proper expectations, and you're tracking their performance, and they understand it and you understand it, It's not heartless. It's, the way I phrase it is I'll tell people, hey, you know what? There's other opportunities out there that are a better fit for you than here. I have tried to get you to share my urgency. And at this point, I don't believe that we're going to be getting on the same page. So you need to go find an opportunity that fits you better, and I need to find somebody that fits what I need better. That's honest. That's truth. And you know what? People respect truth. If you can't give that kind of truth, then you're just being a weak leader. Do you want to be a weak leader? Don't. It's just going to sink your company. It's going to sink your goals. It's going to sink your ambitions. It's going to cause you constant stress. You don't have to live that way. Be strong. Hold to your standards. Hold to your expectations. Find people that you can trust. Find people who are going to help move that bus forward instead of being the anchor out the back door. Now you're going to win. Because when you've got a whole group of people trying to achieve something together because you've cast a vision about where you're going, game over, man. You are going to win. There's no question about it. There's a question that you can ask yourself that's pretty easy to help you understand. Anytime you're facing a situation where it's crossed your mind, probably honestly, if it's crossed your mind, like, is this the right person? You should already probably know the answer. Because if you're asking that question, they probably aren't the right person. That's all there is to it. But the question you can ask yourself to make this simpler is, knowing what I know now, would I hire this person again today? And if the answer to that question is no, then you need to take action and find somebody else. Because and not from the perspective of knowing what I know now is my sunken costs of the training and the time I've spent getting them up to speed. What's the value of that? Forget about that. That's the sunken cost. But who they are as a person, what is their character? What do they bring to the table with their attitude every day? Do they have energy? Do they have belief in the company? Do they speak their positive to everyone around and down and only speak negatives of things that need help to you because you're their boss? That's a good person because they've got a lot of good things. Are they also hitting their KPIs? Great. Now you've got a great person. You need them to be doing both. They need to hit their KPIs. They need to hit their expectations. They need to be on the ball, helping you grow the company, helping move the bus forward, and also have a great attitude. And if you know those things about them, maybe they're doing one or the other. They hit their KPIs. Perfect example. There's been several times where I had to fire the top performing sales rep at my company. That's like scary when you first do it. I remember the very first time I did it. This guy was cancer to the culture. He was by far and away outselling everybody else. But man, he was dragging down the team. His self-entitlement and his belief that everybody should be kissing his butt just because he's the top performer, and the attitude that he walked around the office with, and the way he treated our production team, the way he treated the human resources people, the way he even showed up to sales meetings with arrogance. You know what? Good for him. He was a great top performing sales guy, but the reality is he was dragging down the team. And I made a decision that finally, after months of sitting on this situation, allowing him to treat the team poorly, I finally just made the decision, hey, this is just too much. I've got to let this person go. And the beauty of it is that the very next month we had the top month we'd ever had because the cancer was gone. Everybody's attitudes were better. We produced more as a company. I had a talk with my sales team and said, guys, I've let this guy go because I knew he was dragging you down, your attitude's down. And so I need to get everybody invested and bought in and positive, and we got some kicking butt to do this month. Let's get out there and slay it this month because we don't have this cancer dragging us down anymore. And it came through. We did better than we'd ever done before, even without the top performer. And at that time, that guy was doing, 10% of the entire revenue of the company was coming from this one dude. And we outperformed by, I think, 20% what we'd ever done before that month. It was smaller then. The company was smaller then. But it tells you the power, the impact that you're going to have by getting rid of the cancer, because it wasn't both. He was hitting his KPIs, but he was a cancer. And I got rid of him, and the company thrived because of me not being weak as a leader. And I had been weak for several months prior to that. So it was a eye-opening lesson for me, is get rid of the cancer and make sure everybody's bought in on their KPIs and their attitude and their belief that they're there with a mission. They're going to help customers out. They're going to help people on the team out. With those beliefs and the ability to hit their KPIs, you've got a winning member on your team. That's somebody you can run with. That's somebody you can build trust with. And that's somebody that can help you grow your company. How do you find better people? You need to understand who they are. I highly recommend the book Working Genius by John Lencioni. And he has a thing called the widget test. Great book. Really helps you understand where people are going to be strong. I would recommend that in certain job roles in particular, you have them take that widget test before you actually hire them. If it's a repetitive type of a data entry job, if they haven't demonstrated a passion for that type of a work or a long history of doing that type of work and a high satisfaction ratio in it, then you need to make sure that they're going to have the type of strengths with their working genius to actually do that kind of work. Or maybe it's in sales. If they don't have a really strong sales history, of high-performing sales history, if they've been bouncing from sales job to sales job because they're never satisfied, they're probably just not working in the right category of what their working geniuses are. And so understanding like where their strengths are is super important. But probably even more important to that is hiring for attitude, for values, for energy, for what they bring to the culture of the company. Look at their profiles on Instagram and Facebook and whatever you can learn about this person. Are they a high performer in their life? Are they working to improve their mind? Are they working to improve their body? Do they have a good family life? Or are they out partying every weekend and it looks like maybe they're doing drugs in the evenings? And you can kind of get that information from looking at people's public profiles. You can understand who they are by looking at their posts and their friends and analyze that as part of your decision making when you're deciding who to hire. Hire for the right culture fit. Hire for the energy. Hire for the belief that they can help change something and make it better. Hire for belief that they can grow and perform. We always ask, what are you doing to improve yourself? And to be honest, most people don't have something. That is a belief that we have that's part of our culture, is that you should be constantly working to improve yourself, to be the better person, to grow. My commitment to my team is I'm going to try to grow this company at a rate that will give them opportunity to grow as well. But even under those circumstances, there is turnover. People leave for different jobs, different reasons, different things happening in their personal lives. And if you have people below them, they're always on a growth path, you're going to have somebody ready to fill that next leadership role. You're going to have people who are going to help you really grow the company and make sure things are happening in the right way. They've got to have this ownership mindset. The mindset that, I did my part, tough shit if nobody else did theirs. That is crap. If you got somebody like that on your team, they are not a good culture fit. You should not accept that. You should just kick them to the curb and find somebody else who can get in and say, hey, I did my part, and how can I help with making sure this whole process works smoother? How can I make sure that our customers are happier? How can I make sure that I'm being a positive influence on my team? How can I demonstrate that I'm growing? And what am I doing to grow myself as a human being in my skills and in my beliefs and in my attitude? I read anywhere from 20 to 50 books a year that are just self-improvement books because I understand that if I'm not growing, then nobody on my team is going to grow. I have to lead by example. So make sure you're hiring for the attitude. You can train the specific skills. You don't have to have somebody that knows a specific software most of the time. Most of the time, if you can get the right attitude, you can teach the specific skills if they're the right culture fit. Next thing is hey, you need to hire for the reality and not the potential. It's great to be like, man, this guy, he really sold me on it. Like, I believe he can do it. I know his resume doesn't say anything about his prior performance or her prior performance. It doesn't speak to that. But you know what? I'm sold on him. I like him. Watch out for that. Just because you like somebody, what that probably means is that they're very personable. They're able to do some type of butt kissing for lack of better words. They're able to schmooze their way into positions. But if their resume doesn't reflect their ability to perform, you are hiring because you like them and not because of the reality of who they are. It's such an easy mistake to make. I like to hire people that I like. I want to hire people, and when I talk about culture, I'm looking for that. But I'm also looking for, are they a performer? Can they do the job? Or are they far enough down the path that I can teach them the additional skills and have a clear way of doing that to get them there? If you're not hiring for the reality and you're just hiring for the potential, it's like getting married to somebody, I love them. But, if you're a dude and you're looking and saying, but I think she'd be a terrible wife, but I love her, well, that's hiring that's getting married for the potential, not for the reality. Marriage is a whole different deal. And let's face it, you're marrying this person at work. You're going to be spending 8 hours a day with them, working with them. That's more than you probably spend awake with your significant other. You're getting married to this person. Is this the kind of person you want to get married to? Hire for the reality of who they are. What are they bringing to the table? What are their actual skill sets? Make sure their attitude is right. Make sure that their actual reality of who that person is as a human being is right. And you're going to have, a match made in heaven. So how do you do that? You got to ask difficult questions in the interview process. You need to nail them down. Are they a person who's growing and working to self-improve? If so, how? Tell me what book you're reading. Tell me what you're doing to self-improve. I want to know, and chances are, if you're an active grower, when they start naming off books for self-improvement or something like that, you can be like, yeah, I know, I follow that guy on Instagram. I've read that book. And tell me what you think about that, right? Make sure that they understand and it's not just BS coming out of their mouths. And also ask them other hard questions. One of my favorite questions in interviewing somebody is, I need you to tell me about a time where you have failed and let your team down and it was your fault. What did you learn from that? And what are you going to do differently in the future based on what you learned? A lot of people can't answer that question. And the reason is because they fail to understand that they're ever at fault for anything. It's very narcissistic. And if you have somebody that can't even come up with a single time where they've ever failed somebody on their team or the company they're working for, or even in a personal relationship, if they can't take ownership of their failure, don't hire them. All you're going to have is somebody who's going to play a blame game. They're going to be the victim. They're going to be the person who's always like, it's not my fault. You don't want that. Come on. Get real. You got to get somebody who can take ownership over the situation, understand when they have shortcomings, work to improve, to get better so that it doesn't happen again. Make sure you get that right. Culture, KPIs, past performance, ask some difficult questions. You do those things, you're going to start finding and hiring the right people, and they're going to help you move forward much more quickly than you ever would have otherwise. I came up with an analogy one day when I was talking to a sales team. We've all seen, an eagle flying along, and there's a couple little sparrows or little blackbirds or something that are just harassing the crap out of them. They're flying just above them, and they're dive bombing in and pecking at them and trying to drive them away from wherever that eagle's trying to fly. And that's like a sales team or any other team in your company. Or maybe it's just your small team and you're a smaller company. If you got that person who's not performing, they're always blaming, they're never at fault, they can't take ownership, they're not growing, those guys are your sparrows. And your A players, your eagles that are out there, they're your high performers, your people who have great work ethics, who take personal ownership of stuff, who have great attitudes, who work hard every day to achieve their goals and yours. Eagles don't want to fly with sparrows. And if you allow those sparrows to persist, and if you cannot get them off of your team and out of your life, they are going to drive away your eagles, just like those sparrows do to a real eagle. They're going to drive them away, and then you're going to be left with a handful of sparrows, and you're not going to get anything done. A players want to run with A players. Fill your team with A players and accept nothing less. So at the core of it, hire faster. What that really means is to understand that you have momentum and that you want to maintain that momentum. You need to respect the momentum that you have. Momentum lost is hard to regain. So get momentum with the team you've got. Hire the people that are the A players to fill the gaps so that you can maintain and grow your momentum. Firing faster. Fire with respect, but fire with courage. Understand what the needs are, who the A players are, who the Eagles are, and what that means. How do you define who those people are? Through their KPIs, through their performance, through their attitude, through how they uplift others, through how they help out, how they take ownership of everything that's going on in the entire process of what's going on at your company. But do it with respect. Just let them know, like, hey, you don't need to be angry. You just need to be clear. Leadership is having courage. Leadership is having belief in your vision and communicating that super, super clearly all the time. If you're not communicating your vision, if you're not having courage to have difficult conversations, then you're not leading, you're just being weak. Stop being a weak leader. Have clarity, have purpose, have vision, and then have courage to make sure that everyone around you is upholding that standard. If you can do those things right, you're hiring faster, you're firing faster, you're keeping your momentum, you're staying on track, and you win in the end. I hope this helps. Get out there, make it happen, put it into play today. You all know somebody at your company. If you're running a company, you know who those sparrows are on your team. Make something happen differently. Get rid of those people, or at least have the first conversation, which is the real conversation, which is share my urgency, grow, be a better person, or don't be on my team. You get that right, you're going to thrive. See you on the next one.